Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week, typically, for a couple different reasons. The first of which is to take my brain out of background work over the course of the week and move into the process of writing and preparing a sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. It's the first reason I do these. The second is just to allow you, the viewer, who have come across this video for whatever reason brought you here today, whether this is the first time you've ever stumbled across one of my videos, in which case, brace yourselves, or if you are a regular viewer, in which case, welcome back again, to gain some different insight into the assigned text for the week. So that is why I do these. However, that being said, a brief word. I am not slated to preach this weekend. The schedule is that I will be having a representative from our local, from our Synod area Bible camp that will be coming in and helping to lead part of worship as well as preaching for the weekend, so I am not slated to preach. However, as I have done in the past, sometimes I go ahead and do a video anyway, just to offer some more low-key thoughts on the passage that is assigned for the week. And so that's why I'm doing this one, especially since I'm not preaching. But I wanted to go ahead and do a video because we're moving into a new season. As of last Wednesday, which was Ash Wednesday, we kicked off the season of Lent, which moves here through the beginning of Holy Week and even through Holy Week to until we get to Easter and that little ditty. So with that, just kind of some thoughts on Lent. Oftentimes we call this a dark season, or sometimes we call it a journey or a road as that culminates in the cross. Things continue to get darker and darker and darker as Jesus nears Jerusalem and the culmination of with his passion that is coming. I have different thoughts on that, and just, I don't know, different ways of thinking about it. But Lent sometimes is also called a season of preparation for that. It all points the same direction, I think, kind of depending on your point of view. But that's kind of where we're at now. Now, I did preach Wednesday night for Ash Wednesday, did not get a brain dump done as I haven't in the past. So apologies for that if you happen to be looking for it. If not, don't worry about it. But as we move into this, the assigned text for this week, this Sunday is March 10th, 2019, the first Sunday of Lent, as I mentioned. And the gospel comes out of Luke chapter 4, verses 1 through 13. Now, the story that we will share is the story of Jesus' temptation, oftentimes thought of as the 40 days of temptation in the wilderness, or the 40 days in the wilderness. This is the assigned story every year, regardless of which year we're in the 3-year cycle of the lectionary. And this story is featured in Matthew and Mark and Luke. I think it's in John too. I feel like I should know that. And I'm saying that it is, unless I'm wrong, in which case I'm wrong, and I apologize. But it's definitely in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so the cycle brings us to that particular version each year. This is one of the stories that I also teach my confirmation students in our program there. And that happens every other year. I kind of cycle between preaching Bible narrative and hitting some of the high points or some of the important stories throughout the course of the entire narrative, both the Hebrew Bible and or what we call the Old Testament, and then into the New Testament. And then the following year, I talk about some the small catechism typically, but I'm getting way off base here. So, but this is one that I talked about with my students not too long ago. And it's an important one. It's another one that I talk about actually with in the context of baptism because of where it happens in the narrative. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we'll talk some more about it. So Luke 4, 1 through 13. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over, he was famished. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone." Then the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me. and I will give it to anyone that I please. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours. Jesus answered him, it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil took him to Jerusalem, placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone. Jesus answered him, it is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. When the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time. Okay, so that's the story. A couple more thoughts. As I was reading that, I was thinking more about what I had said a moment ago about how the story appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Mark has a very, very, very short version where it basically says for 40 days he was in the wilderness where he was tempted, and that's it. Matthew features the story fleshed out, very similar to Luke. I actually don't think it's in John now, as I think about it some more. But the main differences between Matthew's version and Luke's version is the order of the temptations. They switch them up. The first one, the whole turn the stones into bread, that's the same. And then Luke has the devil takes him to a high place and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and says, I'll give these to you if you worship me. And then finally takes him to the high place and says, throw yourself down. Matthew reverses the second and third one. And maybe that's not a big deal. Maybe I don't know why that's the case without doing some more studying, which, as I mentioned, I have not done this week since I'm not supposed to preach. But I'm sure it happens for a reason. But that's just worth noting that that's different. One of the things that it does talk about or that I tend to think about is what are the tactics of temptation that's being used? Why does the devil do what he's doing? Well, here in Luke, it actually says that Jesus is being tempted the entire 40 days. So my guess is these are not the only 3 temptations that happen, but there's other stuff that's going on too that just is not recorded that we don't have. So why these ones? And I wonder about the tactics, the ways that our brokenness reveals itself. The first thing that in both versions, but I'm mainly going to think about Luke here, with the turn the stones into bread, Jesus hasn't eaten for 40 days. He's literally starving, and that human need, the hunger, the physical need is the first one that is utilized. Then if we think about the second one, all authority I will give to you, for it has been given to me if you just bow down and worship me. The lust for authority, the lust for power, pride, perhaps is on display here. So that's a temptation. And then the final one, the throw yourself down. It says basically like if you're the Son of God, if you are who you say you are, prove it. Are you? And maybe it's asking the question: Are you really as worthy as maybe you think you are? Or are you as of worth? I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling here with some generic thoughts. But what are those things that tempt us? And another point that I always tend to bring up when I'm teaching on this is what is the cost? What will this cost? Now, the first one, turn stones into bread. Oh, it's going to cost some rocks. Well, that doesn't seem like a real big deal. But think about it. That's part of creation. So are you saying that creation as it is not good enough for me, and so I need to change it to satisfy my desire? So that's something. And then who do we worship in number 2 for Jesus? Where does our worship belong? Our worship belongs with God. And not anyone else. That's creating an idol. That's a major issue. It takes our worship and our devotion away from God. And then the final one of testing God or throw yourself down of are you who you say you are? Well, what's that saying? It's not about what we say about ourselves. It's not what others say about us. It's about what God says about us, and trusting in that. So what is that cost? That's always one of the things I look at. I referenced before that this passage happens in the context of baptism. And I think that's worth noting. And I want to come around to that again, that this is the first thing that happens post baptism of Jesus. And my phone's buzzing. I apologize. So Jesus is baptized, and then we hear, filled with the Holy Spirit, which happens at Jesus' baptism, he is led into the wilderness for temptation. And that's a point I always want to focus on as we remember that our life of faith does not free us from brokenness. It does not free us from the presence of temptation in our lives, that sin still happens, and that sometimes where we go or where we are led by God, by the Spirit, where the Spirit leads, is not always going to be easy. And sometimes the Spirit puts us into places where the presence of the brokenness of the world is fully on display, fully in effect. And so I think about that. I just think about all those things. That seems fitting, and especially here as we are kicking off this season of Lent, that is moving towards the crucifixion that culminates there. As we remember our own brokenness, and we are hopefully being led by the Spirit through this season again, that we are aware of that seasons of temptation happen throughout our lifetimes, and that we are not excused from that, and yet through what Christ is doing and has already done, we are free from it. That's kind of what's happening in this passage. Again, this is pretty brief and pretty scattered because it's just some general thoughts as I read it without a whole lot of background work. But if you have thoughts, questions, comments, want to throw those down in the comment section, we'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, as I've been saying the last few weeks, if you are a regular viewer and these videos are a benefit to you and you appreciate them, they are an outreach of the congregation that I serve who allow me to do this. So if you would like to support that financially, it would always be appreciated, and I will put a link to our congregation's website that has information for how you can go online and donate to our congregation and our operational expenses. So if you feel led to do that, it will be greatly appreciated. If you don't, no worries, no pressure at all. So other than that, I hope you have a great week. We will catch you next time.